rock solid. Oh, you lovers, stand with me. Rise in spirit, oh, you lovers, rise in me. Sing together, oh, you lovers, sing with me. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Elemental Castings. This is Thorn Coyle, and as usual, this is my bi-monthly tour through the elements of life, and you can always find me at thorncoyle.com. I'm recording today from Sydney, Australia, with Tim Hartridge, who has been a practicing witch since his early teens and became involved in coven-based witchcraft in 1973. An active pagan advocate, he has appeared in TV, radio, and print media interviews. For a number of years, he ran an Adelaide radio program, Broomstick Corner, and independently published the Dark Cycle magazine, Vinifica newsletter, and the OzPagan newsletter. The OzPagan internet website was also launched in 1992, making it the first pagan internet website in Australia. Tim was the driving force behind the annual Easter Gathering, the first pagan festival of its kind to be held in Australia, and is currently a major contributor to the annual Euphoria Gathering held in Victoria. He was a founding member of the Sydney-based Dark Circle and continues to run a local coven. Tim presents regular workshops in witchcraft and runs the Witches Workshop internet-based e-list, now the largest Australian pagan e-group. Welcome, Tim.
Hi, how are you?
I'm well, thanks. I'd like to start with a few prayers and invocations. Let's all take a breath together. Holy Mother, in whom we live, move, and have our being, from you all things emerge, and unto you all things return. And we thank and honor all the basic primal elements of life: air, fire, water, earth, and ether. And today we will be delving into the mysteries of earth, the mysteries of the body, of place, of our connection to the land, our connection to darkness, and to the silence of midnight. So, Tim, you have told me that you have a lot of earth in your chart, so this is an apropos podcast.
I'm a Taurian through and through, with a Capricorn rising, so you don't get much more earthy than that.
I'm wondering, what first drew you to magic and magical practice?
Look, I don't think I probably had a name for it at the time. I was having what I now understood, to be psychic experiences, but this was all through my childhood. I grew up in Bondi in Sydney, which is probably a fairly iconic sort of place for a lot of people internationally. You've probably heard of it.
So that's the beach there?
Yeah, Bondi Beach. And we lived right on the beachfront. The place was actually bought for my father's mother, and she passed away there, and I believe it was her ghost that haunted that space. But I do think it probably also attracted a lot of other things, and so we find that all through my childhood there were weird goings-on, lights appearing, noises, apparitions chasing me down hallways.
Wow.
And things like that, so yeah. So it's at that time, obviously I didn't understand what it was. It wasn't till I was sort of in my very early teens that I had one of these psychic experiences where a spirit grabbed hold of me, and it naturally frightened me, but I had a very good relationship with my science teacher, who was also a Christian brother. And so I went to him after class one day, after working up enough courage, told him what had happened, and he just picked up his books and said to me, well, my son, there are some things in this world we just can't explain, and walked away. And I was shocked, because not only did he not have a scientific explanation, but he didn't have a religious one either. And as a Christian brother, he's sort of brought up as a Catholic with presumably some understanding of spiritual matters, but offered nothing. And so I began to read, and it's then I developed a vocabulary to explain what I'd been experiencing.
That's amazing. I had early psychic experiences too as a child, and I find that is true, not obviously for all pagans or witches, but for many of us. That's part of what drew us to the path, was trying to explain these inexplicable occurrences.
Yeah, unfortunately, traditional religion largely wants to live in denial of it. or else wants to exercise it out of our lives. And of course, witchcraft and various other magical practices seek to embrace it, in fact, celebrate it. Yeah, look, I've had a lifelong journey, and hopefully a lot further to go with exploring this sort of material.
Great, thanks. One thing you and I have in common, I believe, is a love for using the body as a gateway for our magic, really involving the body, all of our senses, both, hearing through music, the rhythms, the feeling the beat in the body, using dance in ritual, things like that. And I'm wondering if the body has always been a part of your practice, and if that came from magic, or if you had a strong connection with the physical before you entered into magical practice.
Look, I sometimes have thought that had my parents sent me to ballet, I probably would have been a dancer. I've always loved dance. When I lived in South Australia, I was a member of several different traditional dance groups. When I say traditional, things like English country dancing, the folkloric sort of dances, Irish ceilidhs, that sort of thing. I particularly love the East European circle dances. So I've always had that sense of love of movement. Look, I think because of the way in which I came into practicing witchcraft, it was very much a do-it-yourself project. Like back in the early 70s, there was really almost nobody here in Australia. And at that time, I'd already moved to South Australia and began to explore this. And I was probably even more isolated. But one of the things that I could do very easily, and I think probably well in our circle work, was raising energy through circle dances.
Right.
And I just seemed to fall into it very naturally. And so the few people who I joined with to establish a coven there in Adelaide, they were sort of guided generally by my enthusiasm for things like dance. I was telling my partner recently that back then we used to even dance to the music of Santana and Black Magic Woman. Has a great rhythm for doing circle dance. We got our hands on anything we could get hold of that had a good rhythm. And it subsequently forced me actually to learn how to play the drum. In fact, I think I've got a fairly unique way of actually playing the drum according to some drumming friends of mine. So this sort of self-taught component has enabled me to be able to make it work, but in a very unique style. So
it's fascinating to me. I studied with the Whirling Dervishes for 4 years, and I've studied dance in various forms. And when I first started studying magic, we didn't do any movement. We would lie on the floor to do our journeys, our trances and path workings, and we would raise energy sometimes through singing, but almost no movement with my early teachers. And it didn't work for me. I'm very intellectually based, and my brain is mercurial and can make connections and shift things and think it knows a lot. When really I haven't digested anything, because nothing has penetrated the rest of my being. And physicality is my key component to getting things to actually work on more levels. And of course in magic we want things working on multiple levels, right? Yeah. We want things to be multivalent. And so movement is really key to my practice. And I really find it fascinating that so many cultures use movement for worship and use movement to enter different states of consciousness. The mystics of a lot of traditions use that, I think. And I'm wondering if some of the contemporary paganisms lost that because we became so divorced from the earth, from the environment, and from our bodies via some of these religions that told us we needed to transcend the body and be in denial of the body. And I'm wondering if it's part of our pagan and magical paths to reclaim and reconnect.
Look, definitely. People, for example, who do dowsing, sometimes even called water witching, they report that they feel these energies through their body, and it sort of gets amplified maybe through dowsing rods and this sort of thing. And what I found is that there are places that you can visit where you really do feel the energy moving through you.
Right.
I think in terms of, though, why do a lot of magical groups sort of sit around in lounge chairs and not, get out of their position and dance more? And possibly the reason might be just available space. If they're largely having to meet in lounge rooms, even if you move all your furniture out, you still haven't really got a dance studio or a decent-sized space. And because of the secretiveness, people tended not to, do these out in more exposed public areas. However, what I did was, during my time in Adelaide and certainly I've continued while I've been here in Sydney, is to rent spaces, whether it be a home space or a separate Covenstead space, and actually dedicate that space to ritual work. So if it was in my home, it would always be the largest room in the house. There wouldn't be any furniture as such in there. There might be an altar and so on. The room I would paint appropriately and decorate. And so I've always dedicated a decent-sized space, the largest space available, to do that. And so we've always had the room for the use of dance. Some short while after I moved back here to Sydney, my life seems to have been littered with various fated occurrences, I like to think, and this was one of them, where I connected up with several people who, like me, had a desire wanting to get a magical group working together, even if it was just going to be a small group. And so we started meeting together. And we thought, well, logically, we've got to have a ritual to create a circle with. And we were coming from different traditions. I was principally Wiccan or witchcraft orientated with lots of shamanic elements. And my friends had a very thelemic orientation. Another one had a Golden Dawn, and another person even Rosicrucian. So we decided that we'd try using a thelemic ritual called the Star Ruby, which is a sort of a pentagram circle casting, as far as I'm concerned. And it lends itself very well to the pagan tradition because it doesn't use archangels at the quarters, it uses pagan deities at the quarters. So I thought this was a happy compromise between the different sort of orientations we all had. But really from the moment I started using that ritual, Crowley describes it in a very simplistic way, that you sort of dash your hand down with the words apopanthos, kakodemonos, and banish the energies. What I found was, as I spoke those words, as I was new to ancient Greek, I had to say them slowly, very deliberately, and I used a strong breath with it. And the slower I did it, the more connected to what I called the chi of the ritual I became. Mm-hmm. And it created natural movements, circular movements, and I just followed with them, and the others followed with me. And so because we were working as a circle of peers, we tended to not really have a principal ritualist as such. We all did the ritual exactly together, exactly the same way. So I'd done a bit of Sufi dance that also got incorporated into the ritual, and so was birthed what we came to call the Nox, which is these days I would describe it as a night soul journey. It's an inner journey. It's very much like vision questing, but it has such a strong thelemic magical current to it. I like to emphasize the Middle Eastern energy with it through drum rhythms. We use a Middle Eastern rhythm called Zar, which is a trance rhythm that's used, more often used by women than men. But then Sufi dance traditionally is more often been done by men. So I saw this as an alchemical balance between masculine and feminine energies. You've got the masculine dance form brought in with a feminine drum rhythm.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's interesting. So a night soul journey, of course, night is another power of the earth, that darkness, that primal darkness. And I like that you're bringing the body in to that also. I work with Nox in tandem with Lux, of course, as a form of the divine twins, and use that sort of polarity to do a lot of work. And when I work with Lux and Nox, they, of course, both emerge from and resolve back into Stella Mater, the star goddess, right, who is the source of all. Yeah. So there's that cyclical feeling to tapping into tonight, I think, that is very helpful. And I'm wondering if you can talk any more about the process of the journey the soul goes on in the course of this Knox rite.
Yeah, look, almost everything that, in terms of the way in which the ritual evolved, came out of the ritual. So we simply, instead of fighting it, we went with it. So just as, say, the ritual form and its movement became much more dance and Tai Chi-like, and that was as a result of feeling those energies, so too various other components began to manifest. One of the first things that appeared was a set of mandalas or symbols, sigils that we created a Knox pantacle for, sort of like a mandala to use as a point of concentration in the center of the circle. And that helped focus us, that helped act as a point of these were the divine forms that we were going to be working with. The next thing that sort of began to flow through, and that actually came through me, the pantacle, I might add, came through another member, but the next thing that came through me was a mantra that uses, sort of almost spells out the name Knox. It's simply Nu Amun Aste Om Padar. And Om Padar is a word that's used in the Book of the Law. It's in connection with the great curse. The line goes something like, Om Padar Balasti, I spit on your crapulous creeds, as there's a sense of overthrowing the status quo. I interpreted this word Om Padar, though, to mean something else other than just a bland curse. For me, it meant, it breaks down into Om Pe Da. Om is sort of a universal energy. It's also associated with the daughter current in some magical traditions. Pe means mouth and Da means earth. So this to me says open the tomb or the earth of the daughter current, or remember those things which lie forgotten in the earth, dead and buried. So just as this is a ritual of night rather than day, so this sort of a sense of remembering or resurrecting, if you like, of these old energies is to be done. Things brought back to life. So Om Padar, Nu Amun Aste, O Om Padar. And so this mantra was used with in actual fact, what happened was I heard a sound. I'm not a musician as such, but I have a synthesizer, and I'm able to imitate sounds that I hear sometimes on it, and then fit the words, and that's what happens. So it has quite a strong Middle Eastern sound to it when it's played. From there, there were visionary experiences that began to occur, and something that hadn't really occurred to us at the beginning was where were we being led, and a divine form appeared that doesn't actually feature in the original ritual at all, but Anubis as guide and guardian of the lightless souls who journey into the afterlife, this psychopomp figure. And he appeared as the guide that would take us between, you could say, civilization and the desert regions, which is now where we began to understand that we were entering a sort of psychic reality which looks a bit like a deserty climate. And Australia is about 95% desert.
Right.
A very well-known poet here in this country called Les Murray says that that's because 95% of this country is reserved for spiritual activity.
Fantastic.
Which I take quite literally, I think, yeah. So whenever I get a chance to get out into the desert, I try to do it. So this ritual actually began to grow of its own accord. And the desert's not a lifeless place. It's a metaphor, obviously, but also it is a place where you are able to, in a sense, clear away all the clutter and get back to the fundamentals of who you are. So.
I'm thinking of a lot of things listening to you speak. First off, this morning I pulled the Ansu's rune, which is the rune of listening. It's also the mouth of the gods, right?
Okay.
And I keep hearing you talking about listening to the energy, listening to the ritual, allowing the form to form itself right? And then I'm also very struck simultaneously that because here you are in this land that is 95% desert, you were listening to that as well, right? You're very informed by place, it seems, and that feels like it also opened the ritual for you. Do you think that's an accurate assessment?
Definitely. Even prior to coming back here to Sydney to live, where I was living in Adelaide, but Adelaide's a small city, and it's very close to the desert. So it's very easy to get into the country area, and we had a country property that we would use to take on go for weekend retreats, and that place is just alive and living with we'll call it the ancestral energy of the people, Aboriginal people of this country. You can find physical examples, rock paintings and so on there. Initially, we didn't realise they were even there. It was only through doing a bit of research we were able to find locations that are kept secret by the government, mostly because they don't want tourists sort of going in and ruining these places. But yeah, I had many psychic experiences there. I can't say that they were comfortable ones always. In fact, I never liked going up to this particular property by myself. I just didn't feel, you get that feeling somebody's watching you. Well, you get a feeling like you really shouldn't be there. And so I'd always go up with reinforcements, like cover members, so that we could do these drum trance journeys or other rituals there. There was one there's lots of rocks there, and there's one particular big rock there which we just called our shaman egg, and it's basically a big egg-like object that has been hollowed out on the inside by wind and erosion. And so we would sit in there to sometimes do some of our drum journeys. And one night there, we used to always start very late, so it was well after midnight, and we were doing our drumming, and so only about 3 or 4 of us in there, and one of the people suddenly gets out this blood-curdling scream, and she's not somebody who frightens easily, but something had began to move through the space, and then I felt it, and it was like the land had become quite liquid-like. It felt like you were in the undulation of a serpent power. And as I looked out of the opening, I could see across the horizon this energy moving. It just rippled, and this is at night, and it was only lit by moonlight, so it's in a sort of quasi black and white, and it pulled us through. It was quite, I yelled at that point, because it all happened so quickly, but you can touch into these spaces, but it's a bit like going to, the beach and getting dumped by a wave. You can swim as hard as you like, but you're not going to be able to stop that being pulled under and pulled along by it. So, we can connect to these things, but they are a lot bigger than we are.
Mm-hmm. I'm wondering if you have... I've certainly had those sorts of experiences as well, really powerful, visceral, psychic and physical experiences that are palpable. I was actually sitting in a friend's dining room and felt what seemed like a giant serpent moving behind my chair. And I said, what was, there was a snake. And she said, oh yes, we have nagas in our house. Mm-hmm. They work a lot with those energies. I had no idea. And why would I say that? And I love the dissonance between my rational, skeptical brain and these out of the blue, palpable, visceral, physical experiences. And I'm wondering if you work much with that interplay between what the rational mind is telling you and what other senses are telling you. Yeah,
look, I think I've always been aware of a split brain, where and we know, science can sort of tell us a lot about that sort of split brain and what it really means. I work as a graphic designer, and so I think I'm probably working with the intuitive, sensing, visual component of my consciousness much more so than a rational level. And I've always probably been that way. In fact, I tend to approach my work, even like a lot of commercial work that I do, with a sense of intuiting what is needed. And of course, you can't always tell clients that's what you're doing, because they won't always understand. There's a sense of they think you're a bit crazy, or they may undervalue even what work you can do. But I'm very much aware of it. I, in fact, get my best results in the couple of days lead up to full moon.
Mm-hmm.
That's really when I'm the most creative. So you've caught me on a good moment, as we're approaching full moon right now.
We certainly are.
So yes, I am quite conscious of that part. I don't think it's something that can be tamed exactly. What you can do is you can recognise it and don't dismiss it away. And the more frequently you do that, the more it comes through, and that's been my experience.
That's been my experience as well. And I often tell people when I'm doing psychic training that the first thing we have to do is start to trust that intuitive voice and that those messages more often, and to learn to act on them immediately, because the more we do that, the more we train it, as you're saying.
Yeah. It's look, and the comic side to it all is, if you tell your partner, look, I've got this intuitive feeling, they're likely to say, don't give me that rubbish, as though you're trying to use it as a bit of a leverage to get your way with something. But I can think of many examples of just how that has worked out to advantage. And in fact, some years ago, I was taking a little afternoon nap and suddenly woke up out of this, what was sort of a dream. It was more like an out-of-body experience, where my friend's car was being stolen. I knew at that very moment. It was driving down this particular road. And so I grabbed them. They were there with me. I grabbed them. We rushed up to their house 5 minutes away. And sure enough, the car had been taken. The neighbour had seen it, backed out of the garage by this person she happened to know. And was later caught by the police. So sometimes you can't even be quick enough to really grab it. It's happening there and then as you experience it. Yeah. But it's sometimes though you can preempt. You can have precognitive experiences, dreams. Some years ago, I did some work, Jungian dream work, and the more I did, the more I understood just how much my unconscious self knew about things of the future. And then as I reflected on it, I thought, well, actually, it's sort of been that way a lot during my life, particularly earlier on. When I was a young child, I knew I'd be involved in a legal battle to do with witchcraft. And sure enough, many years later, when I was about 21, I had this big legal battle, and but by that stage I, of course, was very familiar with the law. I had done some research into it all and understood what the law said. And the case that actually ensued through this experience did actually help change the witchcraft law in South Australia. It was eventually taken before the local Attorney General, and these old archaic laws were actually changed.
It's only been fairly recently, isn't it, that these laws were overturned?
Well, it's state by state here in this country. There are some federal laws. Look, and some of these laws were designed to protect people, gullible people.
From charlatans.
Yeah. But, of course, it gets misused when it's directed toward, perhaps a religious practice. And so it largely has been changed now, so that anyone practicing witchcraft in this country is pretty safe. It's mainly the story of where, if money is exchanging hands, there may be some circumstances where, if it were being done for a spell or something like this, there might be questions brought in about fraudulent use of such practices.
Right. I want to go back. There are a couple of things I want to talk about. The first is, again, the discussion of the desert as not only a physical landscape, but a psychic soul landscape. I've been dealing a lot with many of my spiritual direction clients lately, and students, and just other people in my vicinity who are having a really difficult time. And some of them could be described as having dark nights of the soul. And I was writing recently about, even in the midst of these intense difficulties and adversity, whether it's economic or emotional or psychological or psychic, adversity, can we find gratitude? And where's our source of connection? And I was really struck by you talking about the desert as having life in it, as being a vital place. And I really find that that's also true for these desert moments in our lives, that we can feel like we are in a wasteland, but really the reason we feel like we're in a wasteland is we've numbed ourselves, we feel desolate, and we have lost all sense of connection. So I'm wondering if you have any insight on ritual or magical or prayer or spell work that can help bring us back into a state of connection. And before hearing your answer, I just want to say, of course, for me, this is part of why daily spiritual practice is so important, because whether I'm in a state of joy or feeling really connected and successful in life, or in a state where things feel difficult, there's a heartbeat there. Mm-hmm. There's something to grab hold of, and that's my way of doing it. And I'm wondering what your take on that is.
Yes, well, I mean, you hit on to many key elements, the associations that we have with words like desert, desolate, and so on. And, you're quite right. These are sort of moments of dark night of the soul. My interest in Jung have looked at his interpretation of such things, which he called Nakia, which is actually a night sea journey, which, as you can understand, is in the same way a desert journey can be perilous. Obviously a night sea journey is the same sort of thing. Unless you can navigate your way, you can get lost or you can go down. And look, I do concur with you with regards to daily connections to these things. I don't know that I always practice overtly. I mean, a lot of the time this is just very much a personal thing. I constantly feel in touch with my own intuitive ability, and I do a lot of reading, a lot of personal study. So I do like group work, and so I've been one of those people who's tended to organise groups and group practice and covens and so on. So for me, there's always been a teaching training area, and I'm as much learning from it as they are. I mean, it's I tell my students that we're entering into this process as researchers, and we're going to research this material together, and their experiences are just as valid as mine. In fact, I'll probably learn a hell of a lot through their experiences. So, group work is a dedicated time, but at the same time, you have to do a lot of preparation in terms of what you do. And in fact, being a Taurian, I take forever to do things. So it's years in the making, quite often, my rituals. A lot of preparation I'm drawing from over time. But yeah, the desert has always held some attraction for me. I do love lush green places too, but it's been through the symbolism of the desert that I've been able to access something, and I guess it's uncluttered. See, our lives are full of stuff, and I mean, you've visited me here in my home. Clutter is my middle name. I mean, I have just books everywhere and lots of stuff. And so, the desert you enter into really with the bare essentials, the things you need to survive with. What I do say about the Nox ritual as a working to find soul or get in touch with soul is that there are specific times in our lives when we become sort of disorientated or lost. We don't know where we are, why we're here, or what the hell's going on. And that's really, to me, a big signal to say you need to start doing this inner work and retrieving those intuitive messages that will help guide you out of it. So they're not dissimilar, perhaps, to the way in which somebody doing dream work might work with their dreams as a way of finding understanding about who they are and where they're going. The main difference is that I'm utilising a ritual language, I'm utilising body work and dance and movement as a way of feeling what am I getting from this, and I'm not just relying on the intellectual understanding of it all. It is definitely much more of you've got to sense and feel it all. I constantly talk to people about feel the energy or the chi, don't just sort of think about it.
Right.
In fact, I often say to them when I'm introducing, ritual words that might be quite foreign to them, I said, forget about the gobbledygook, just get in touch with the chi of the ritual, and go with the vibe, man, that sort of thing. so that they can really have confidence that they can do it, regardless of their level of understanding of these things. Mm-hmm. So you don't have to have necessarily an intellectual understanding, but like myself earlier on, I realised reading does give you a good vocabulary to be able to explain it to others.
And context, which is nice. I like having context on different levels.
Yes.
The other thing I'm thinking right now, Tim, is talking about the desert, and you use that wonderful word uncluttered, and I'm thinking of our internal clutter, of course, and the fact that the overculture right now has trained us so much towards instant gratification and towards speeding up all the time. And, we have attention deficit disorder, and we leap from thing to thing and always, clicking on the computer. And I'm wondering also if another gift of these desert times in our lives might not be the ability to slow down.
Definitely. Yeah, look, the ritual forms that we use are long. You could say a little bit arduous, in as much that the dancing is quite extensive as a part of it. And the lead into the ritual it starts by stopping. we sit in absolute silence. You start to connect with your breathing. You slow it right down. Mm-hmm. You're doing everything a la Taurian style of taking it very slowly. The mantra that's then used further slows your breathing down because it's actually regulating the flow of the breath. And then we enter into this visualization, which is attempting to build a psychic landscape or an imagined world that you're going to enter into. So all of that definitely slows things down. And the beauty of the Nox too is that it requires almost nothing to do. Like you don't have to have like elaborate ritual robes or anything else. You can just do it really anywhere. I usually use a pentacle or a mandala at the center of the circle, but you could draw that in the sand if you wanted to. Really, your ritual tools are this visualized psychic landscape, and so it's not as though you have to go and get that. You can carry it inside of you, or you could go off into the wilderness and do this sort of work, which I've done a number of times. Sometimes I might like to burn a bit of incense, particularly myrrh I associate with this ritual. But apart from that, you could just use what available gum leaves are around. I love using red gum actually as an incense. That has a very distinctive scent. So it doesn't really require anything much to carry with you. It's not doesn't have to be heavy ceremonial work. If we're working indoors, we do clear the space entirely because we're going to be using dance and movement, and you can't have lots of clutter with that.
Right.
So all those components are going to impact on you because they're, in a sense, stripping away you to the bare essentials, and you're in fact, a lot of people describe this ritual as the loneliest ritual they've ever done. Loneliness is definitely a manifestation of the onset of Nox, where you enter into a space where you do feel very isolated, even though you might be in a room full of people. I've done some very large rituals, where we might have 50 or 60 people doing this in quite a big area. But so many of them report a sense of facing their own loneliness. And that's sort of part of the crossing. That's really where you start to realise, well, hang on, what are the things that really do matter in my life, and where am I really going? As you say, we get tied up with all sorts of stuff. I mean, the computer is great. I use it all the time, but God, it can actually prevent you from doing some many constructive things. And so these times actually help, I suppose, help me find my compass again about the direction I'm going in, what matters. And it's through feelings, largely. Sometimes I'll have some quite intense visionary experiences. What comes out of these practices are many and varied. There's no expectation about what should come out of it. Some people connect with animal power, so it becomes quite a shamanic experience for them. Others connect with past life experiences. I've had many of those with the Nox, where it's shown patterns of things I had done in previous lives that I see also in this life, and it's provided a sense of continuity to me, an understanding of, right, okay, if I did that last time and I see this happening here, why am I still stuck with that? Or what was important perhaps? What am I not exploring fully with that? Mm-hmm. So the Nox ritual really goes in any direction. Mm-hmm. It's not a predefined destination. It's really the journey. It's really, each individual will evolve it through themselves, and you may do one Nox ritual, have a fabulous experience, but more likely you'll have to do it many times over many years. Mm-hmm. I mean, I've been using this ritual since the mid-1980s, and although we have like a fundamental structure to it, I always say to people, well, there's no reason why that can't evolve in other directions, and we do often incorporate other components into it.
Is the basic structure available on the Witches Workshop website? Yeah,
it is. You'll see links to the Nox workshop, and when you click on that page, it'll talk a bit about what the Nox is about, and maybe one of the workshops we've either have just run or will be running. We do try to run them every now and again, as frequently as we can, which means, maybe in terms of formal workshops, several times a year. And in there's lots of links to the actual ritual itself, the description about where it's come from, a bit about its history and so on. Yeah.
I'm also interested, you have talked to me outside the podcast about one of the key places you've done this ritual, the national park, and I'm wondering how working on that particular land affects the ritual working.
You're probably referring to Uluru, I take it.
Yes, Uluru.
So, yes, it is a national park, I guess, and park may not bring immediately to mind what's really there, which is just endless desert, red sands, and in the middle is this enormous rock. The first time I saw Uluru, I was shocked. I'd seen it many times in pictures and on television, and then when I did this pilgrimage to Uluru, I was just amazed how big it is. It was so much larger than I could possibly imagine. I did a pilgrimage there. I sort of made a promise to myself that I wouldn't leave Australia until I had gone to the spiritual centre, which for me was Uluru. And then I felt free. I could travel elsewhere. My next pilgrimage was some years later to another desert, Cairo and the Sahara and pyramids, and spent about a month there. But the thing about like the desert I experienced, I suppose, in terms of my visualizations, is very definitely an Australian desert. Egyptian deserts tend to be beige. Mm-hmm. I love rich, strong colours, and the red deserts of Australia suit me down to a T. Intriguingly, we have also a desert dog here, or an Anubis archetype, which is the sometimes they're called dingoes. The wild dogs are actually called warragals, and they're not very friendly really. They probably will steal your babies, but they come up of an evening, a bit like the jackals of the Egyptians, at dusk, and they come up from the desert, and they will come close to humans, mostly for water or sometimes food, but they live in this liminal sort of space, this point between civilization and the wilderness. And that's why Anubis is this sort of archetypal Egyptian divine form, god of sort of preparation for the dead into their journey into the underworld or beyond. It plays a central role in our ritual, and we see it in the wildlife there. I did this journey there. I spent about 5 days, and this was my first time I went there, about 5 days there, immersing myself, getting my feet in the sand, as they say. And the sand is beautiful. It's finer than beach sand. It's beautiful. And in the evenings, the stars are spectacular. I mean, the body of Nui, the goddess of the night sky, is very present. And So I did a journey there to actually do the Nox ritual and immerse myself there. And a strange thing sort of happened, I suppose, in terms of, I imagined, because I was able to wander out where there was nobody around. I was there with my partner, and I thought I'll be able to yell my heart out, But I found just the opposite. I found that I was feeling overwhelmed by this ginormous space, that I felt quite dwarfed, and my voice felt very dwarfed in this space too. And I suppose that was a little bit of popping back in the box, the old ego from inflation, and a sense of putting things in perspective, that you're just a little part of this whole thing, and you can try to reach out to it. You're not going to command anything. You're going to try to enlist some sort of connection, maybe.
Right.
So I'm a bit of a critic when it comes to the way in which some magicians and witches work. They talk in terms of calling up the elements, and I always think that's a bit arrogant, because I think, why is the wind going to listen to Tim,
right.
Or water or whatever? And so I've always seen those sort of orientations as a way of me connecting to the element,
yes.
going out, really. And so when I immersed myself in this environment, I felt well and truly as though I was a tiny little part of a much bigger energy. The numinous of those spaces is very palpable. It's very, you feel it, you feel, yes, dwarfed by the whole experience.
Every time I travel to a new place, and of course I travel all the time, I always introduce my energy to the energy of the land there, and that's been a really fertile practice for me. I've learned a lot about nature spirits that way. It's given me a different relationship and perspective to the place I'm visiting, and it shifts my relationship to myself while I'm there. I can't just carry all of my old assumptions with me. I can't just carry my usual thought patterns. I have to pause and say, wait a minute, there's a different structure here.
Yeah.
The land in Tasmania is completely different from the land in Sydney, from the land in Hawaii, from the land in Philadelphia, and from the land, of course, in San Francisco. So my resonances shift. And I hear you speaking about that in going to Uluru, that you had to reassess everything.
Yeah, look, I do think that, typically, white fella comes in, doesn't just want to stick the flag in the ground and say, we claim this, but wants to rename places often. We've been fortunate that Uluru's sort of reclaimed its name, back from the old Ayers Rock title that it was given, which is very dull. And those traditional names attempt to try and describe something of the energy of the place. Uluru's it doesn't really have any. When I say it doesn't have any meaning, it doesn't actually mean something else. It's simply the name of that place. It's a very sacred place to the Aboriginals. All around the rock are. There are some paintings you can go and see, some of the rock paintings, but there are many sites there you're not permitted to go into because they're still used by the Aboriginals there. There are sites for men and women. Sometimes you'll be walking around it, and I might add, it's a very long walk. You would need a few hours to get it all the way around. You'll see some notices where they'll ask you not to take photos of this next area you're coming up to because that's a sacred place to women, for example.
Fantastic.
There's the rainbow serpent features, which might seem a little odd in a place that's so deserty there, but it does actually rain in Central Australia at certain times. But there's a water hole there. I actually collected some water there and brought back with me. It was very pure water. It's cleaner than Sydney water. But that's the rainbow serpent said to come down into and make its exit from these sorts of places, these water holes. And so you can sort of see this amazing slippery track that comes over the edge of the rock. They do tend to, of course, discourage people from climbing it, and there's also risks. There's plenty of people died falling off, I might add. So. But the desert all round, as there's a large area that is handed back to the traditional owners, and they they look after it, and basically by not interfering with nature is the best way they actually manage the so-called park. But it is, you find lots of little shrubby trees and spinifex, she oaks and things like that there. So it's not like a completely devoid landscape of nothing growing there. There is definitely there, but you do get open spaces of just red sand too. And I think it's always the dusk into the evening times that I like best. Not being one for the direct sunlight, I tend to prefer this sort of desert at night. And it's a very beautiful place, and it's just so calm, and it's completely silent when you're out there. If you stop talking for a while and you just sit there in the sand, it's just amazing. And you don't have to walk very far to get away from, where there are people. There is a complex there where people can, stay, quite large area. But you can just walk out into the desert and you can still find your way back easy enough. So.
Well, and that's a lovely phrase. We can walk into the desert and find our way back. And with that, I would actually love to connect a little bit with this power of night and silence and earth by inviting everyone listening to take another breath with me. And let's just drop into silence for a few moments together and connect to that. Blessed be all the powers of earth.
Blessed be.
Thank you so much, Tim. It's been a pleasure.
Yes, likewise, thank you.
And again, you can find Tim and some of his projects at witchesworkshop.com. And I'm T. Thorn Coyle at thorncoyle.com. And once again, let us thank all the primal elements of life that we are connected to and that flow through our lives: air, fire, water, earth, and spirit. And Holy Mother, in whom we live, move, and have our being. From you all things emerge, and unto you all things return. Blessed be.
Stand rock solid, oh you lovers, stand with me.